All right, glad to have you back. President Bola Tinubu's fiscal improvement, according to the president, which includes sharp decline in budget deficit, enhanced debt service ratios, and surge in foreign reserves. He said the government has seized ways and means borrowing, and Nigeria National Petroleum Company Limited has become a net contributor to the Federation account. Mr. President also spoke about social investments, including upgrading thousands of health centers, expanding cancer and dialysis treatment, increased health insurance coverage, and supporting education through infrastructure and student loans. On security, he noted enhanced cooperation among security agencies, successful operations against bandits, and safer transportation routes. Well, all of this, I will continue this conversation as I speak to Mr. Olusegun. He is the co-founder and director at Budget. He joins me from Abidjan. It's good to have you on the program to discuss this issue. How are you today?
It's a pleasure being here today. I'm fine. I'm doing well.
Yes.
I'm joining you from.
Yeah, let me allow you to do an overview of the policies of Mr. President and where you think we'll find ourselves at the moment.
I think it's a good time to review the president's policy. This is the midterm appraisal, so if we're going to look about how the president would end, we will have to start paying attention from this point. We have to first start with the economy, and I think that's one key place to think through. He inherited a very difficult economy. We have to understand that. And I think all the presidential candidates in 2023 made mention that they would take on the removal of fuel subsidy. They also discussed that they would be big on the convergence of the exchange market. To be honest with you, he has taken those two decisions, and I think, let's be honest, the macro levels are improving. Like the previous speaker mentioned, we have a trade surplus. We now have maybe a relatively stable currency, and there is no much divergence with the parallel market. We also have to agree that public revenues have gone up, obviously, with the devaluation, with the steep devaluation of the currency. So when you look at things from the macro perspective, even look at it from the growth, there's been improvement. There are also downsides to that. Inflation has remained very stubborn, even despite the recent recalculation of the inflation index. I mean, it still has been at 24%. But there are also wider challenges here, because also these macro decisions, they were not applied, in my own view, in a holistic manner. The haste in which the first subsidies were removed without strong palliative measures means that Nigeria went through a very difficult period, and are still going through a difficult period in the last 2 years. Inflation has had significant impact on goods and services and the quality of livelihood. If you also look at the fact that most of Nigerians, if you ask them, the standard of living has weakened significantly since then. So, and it took almost a year to really define the palliative measures to these decisions. Even it took more than a year to even fully implement the minimum wage. Some of states, some government institutions still do not have a full implementation of the current minimum wage at 70,000 naira. So for me, he's made a big decision. He's made a big call. I don't think it's been done in a very, very structured manner. But those decisions have been made. And I think he's living with the consequences of those decisions and how to significantly mop up the issues that have emanated from that. The other part, when you look at infrastructure, yes, there's still a big deal to push out on infrastructure. So many projects have been awarded, but I don't think he has done make significant push. I mean, we talk about the coastal road that's overshadowed almost everything, but in terms of there are tons of projects, I mean, kilometers of projects have been left stranded that have not been completed, and I think the attention should have been put on those projects. But like I mentioned, what I think has been a continuous feature of his problem, of his government, is a lack of coordination, and you could also see that from the fiscal point. The monetary policy decisions, a lot of them are on point. It's been helpful, but if you look at the fiscal side, there's been no discipline, there's been no fiscal efficiency as you expect it to be. If there is no fiscal efficiency that is coupled with monetary program of the CBN, we can't have the kind of progress that we hear. So I think there are big ideas in this government compared to the previous government we have, but there's still a lack of coordination and making sure that some of those projects are moving at the right pace and at the right time, so that the impact can be well sustained.
Talking about the impact, yes, sustaining that impact, what sort of interventions will you say is running through your mind? Because I keep asking that question, because when you read series of reports, you see people talking about what it means for the man on the street. What sort of interventions are you expecting for those kind of persons?
I mean, at the beginning, the questions were asked, what was my advice? I can remember on TV, what was my advice for the president? And I was clear, number one is food inflation. Till now, the president has not had a very holistic approach to food inflation issues. I mean, there have been efforts to open the borders and to allow some level of importation, but what does that mean for the domestic farmers? I mean, there's been no holistic solution to the food inflation. I think the Ministry of Agri is due for a rejig. And if you even now look at the budget, you see how the Ministry of Agriculture has become a dumping ground for all frivolous type of projects. That's narrowed, it has taken the ministry away from its core objectives. So I think the president has to have a grip of what is happening from the fiscal side. And if he wants to do that, I mean, the big way to really challenge the current hardship faced by Nigerians is to look at what do I make, how do I ease my agricultural value chain, and how do I ensure that price of food come down. There's other thing also when you look at man on the street, there's also exchange rate stability. There has to be a bit of anchor. I know there's a big talk around we need to, we are floating the Naira, and I don't think we have a full float of the Naira currently, but there has to be some stability being pushed ahead. The devaluation is not a good thing, but there's something that is worse than devaluation is a certainty. I mean, if we know that we're going to be on 1,500, 1,600 within the next 24-month corridor, that sounds reasonable. So the president has to look at his resource levers. How do you continuously up the oil production levels so that we're able to get optimal outcome from that environment? And the FIRS, how do you optimize the non-oil revenues, the independent organizations? So if the president, whatever the president is doing in that regard, I mean, highly commendable, but he needs to just deepen more in terms of raising revenue and applying them efficiently. So if there's other things, let's also look at Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. We know what that ministry went through. I mean, the previous minister, Better Edu was sacked. We had a new minister. We need to have traction from that agency because of that, and the ministry is there. Because there's so much help that Nigerians need in terms of facing the current challenges that they have. So, in my own view, a food inflation thing has to be really well tackled. There also has to be a lot of work on fiscal efficiency. The thing about President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's government is that he has to fight back on those who would hijack his government in terms of just using public resources to smoothen their lifestyle. If he's not fighting back on those things, we will not get the kind of results that he significantly wants. So I think he's not gotten the pass mark in my own view, but he's inherited a very difficult situation. But he needs a lot of more coherence to kind of get the kind of impact that he truly wants.
We see a boost in our reserves. Well, the last CBN MPC meeting, and we saw a retention of rates, and many say that confidence is gradually returning to Nigeria's economy. I want to ask you how that also comes to you and what you make of it.
I mean, let's agree. I've spoken about the macros. Macros reflect that there's confidence in the Nigerian economy.
Great stuff.
That was significantly
oversubscribed.
You know, we have reserves net reserves, and I don't even want to just talk about reserves from a gross perspective. The net reserve, which is very important, as the CBN has grown significantly. So I mean, everybody looks at those indices and says, yeah, it's going to put our money. Stock exchange. I mean, if you look at where the president made the stock exchange and where we have now, there's been tremendous growth. So we have banks now declaring billions, even though we know the real estate sector is still comatose. Like I say, it's a mixed bag of everything. But if you look at it from the macros, and I'm big on the macros, because a lot of times what the previous government did, they didn't care about the macros. They just want the microeconomy to work. If the fundamentals, which are the macros, are not effective, are not working, you don't get the society that you want. So if the macros are looking good, it's just more coherence from the government to be able to ensure that there's a proper handshake between the macroeconomy and the microeconomy. And a lot of things can do that effectively. How you apply your fiscal resources is one of it. How you tackle food inflation is one of it. How you ensure that there's exchange rate stability and certainty is another part of it. If you combine all of that together, you're also ensuring that your social protection programs are holistic and effective. You get the kind of answers that you want down the line.
So let's talk about global issues now, what it also means for Nigeria. You are at an international meeting there at Abidjan, and you know, a lot of talks around Trump's tariff and all of that. How do you see that also impacting, well, not only Nigeria now, even the entire continent?
I mean, it's a difficult one. I mean, here there are big conversations around capital flows, and I think that's the conversation that has dominated the African Development Bank meeting in Abidjan, which I'm currently participating in. And I think also let's not forget that the US is trying to pull back in terms of its investments in the institutions. So big conversation around this wave of right-wing nationalism that has been enveloping the entire world. And I think it's also a point for Africa to reflect and make a bigger pitch about itself. I mean, we just don't want to be a charity case. We just don't want to be, we also want to be an investment opportunity. And we also want to be a place to diversify value chains. Right? So for me, I think the president should, the African leaders need to come together and make a strong case of the United States. This is not the time to pull back from Africa. It's time to reinforce that Africa can become a counterweight to Asian manufacturing. Its young, dynamic population can be an opportunity for the world to grow. And I think that's what the big story about here has been. Capital flows are being threatened, a lot of pullbacks, and it's an opportunity to look elsewhere. I mean, it could be the Nordic countries, it could be the UAE, the Gulf countries, it could be China, it could be India. It also might be time for Africa also to rejig its capital inflows and make sure that it reduces significant dependence on Western countries. But also important that we just make a case that there is a huge investment opportunity in Africa, and we need to also do this, not just because we are making a case for solidarity, multilateralism, but this is because this is an investment opportunity for us.
Before I let you go, what do we do with regards to projections from IMF and the likes of World Bank, which has obviously projected that maybe many more might even fall into poverty line in Nigeria? I just spoke to the SA and he says he doesn't agree with that. But you know, generally, what do you make of their submissions for countries across our continent?
I think IMF is making a sweeping decision of considering the fact that current trajectories within the U.S. growth or Western growth based on the current wave of tariff. Yeah. Current growth trajectories might be shortened or might be weakened. And I think that's been applied broadly across countries. I mean, we, in terms of our size of the economy, I mean, even as Africa as an aggregate, we're not significant yet. But there's an opportunity to grow in that space. I think that wherever we find ourselves, maybe 3% growth, 2.5% growth, maybe that's where we'll find ourselves. It's significant. It's not significant for a developing country like us, but it's a push forward. What we need to do is that how much of that growth is sustainable, how much of that growth is spread around the environment. Where are we growing? Are we putting a lot of investment in agriculture? Are we driving our export-led initiatives? Are we smoothing the processes for businesses to register, to repatriate capital? Are we continuous on these macroeconomic resilience programs? So those are the conversations we need to pull forward, because I mean, we are not going to be immune from global crisis. If you look at the oil prices, maybe there's an unspoken understanding that oil prices will tend around the $60 to $65 per barrel corridor. What does that mean for us in terms of the projections that we have done? Does it become, is it an opportunity for us to slim down on some of the items? of waste or inefficiencies that is going to be identified by our organization. So it's time for us to just reflect more as an organization or as a country. How do we tighten our efficiencies? And how do we smoothen the pathway for private sector to thrive? If we put all those two things in way, public sector efficiencies isn't the pathway for private capital. It will be, we will be able to make a big case out of all of the current challenges that the world is facing right now.
Well, co-founder, director budget, Olusegun, thank you so much for spending your time with us, with your busy schedule there in Abidjan. Thank you. Do enjoy the rest of your day and have a great time over there.
Have a wonderful one too. Have a great one. Wishing you the best. Bye. Thank you.
All right, then. Bye. Well, it's time to see market figures now and see what they are looking like this afternoon. And to review the exchange figures with me is equities trader at APT Securities and